Welcome to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. My name is Adam from cerebralrevolt.com, and here with me is my co-host Aaron from theageoftransitions.com. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Very good. Excited to be here, as always.
Indeed. And today, as usual, we will be reviewing another film for this month, another very, very, very interesting film. The name of the film is Johnny Depp and the Night of the Nanites.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if people are aware of that film, but that's the name of the film, and we'll be discussing that in depth.
I don't think I've even heard of that film, actually.
Yeah, that's because it's actually called Transcendence.
Oh, okay. I did watch that, yeah.
Yeah, no, I saw that one.
I saw that film,
yeah, sorry, folks, this is just a little inside joke there. But anyway, so yeah, the film we will be reviewing today is called Transcendence, which is about a artificial intelligence researcher named Will Castor, played by Johnny Depp, no less, who, well, basically, it follows the story of him, developing technology and being opposed by certain groups, and then actually being kind of assassinated or killed by, an anti sort of AI group, and then eventually having his consciousness uploaded into a quantum supercomputer that he'd built so that he can still remain alive. Much like if people have seen the film The Lawnmower Man, very similar concept, Mm-hmm. This guy's dying, and he, the solution to keep him alive, so to speak, is to upload his consciousness into the supercomputer that he'd been building, and which was his whole idea in the first place. He'd been building this big supercomputer to try and upload a brain into it, and when he dies, or when he gets shot by I think is it a radiation laced bullet or something like that?
Yeah, that part was kind of confusing to me. I was like, all of a sudden he was shot or something. That part of the movie actually kind of like took me by surprise. Like all of a sudden he was dying, and I guess I'll just note quickly here that wasn't the best movie. Like that, there was a lot of weaknesses in the film, and one of them I would just point out right here while we're on it was I was confused as he was dying. I was like, "No, wait a minute, he's dying now." But that might have just been because I might have not been paying attention for a couple of seconds too.
Well, it's an easy thing to do with a film like this because there's a lot going on, so your mind can wander. But yeah, that's what happens. I mean, basically, the film starts out. I'll explain the very opening scene. We'll explain the very opening scene later on. But the film sort of starts out with introducing this character, and he goes on to what's basically like a kind of like a TED talk. I mean, it's called something else in the film, but it's what it is.
It's like this. It looks like the Singularity Summit for sure.
Yeah, something like that. That sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And he's up there, and he comes off stage, and there's kind of like a little press kind of hoopla afterwards, and from memory anyway. And then one of these these what they call them in the film, these neo-luddites, what they anti-technology. They're called the Rift, the group. And they shoot him. They actually shoot him, and the bullet only grazes him. So physically, initially he's okay. I mean, he has some minor surgery and he's all right. But then they discover that the bullet was laced with some kind of radioactive, chemical or substance, and this is now infected his bloodstream and it's breaking him down, and he's only got like a month to live. And so, it follows him, the deterioration of his body and everything like that. And when he eventually dies, and his wife, obviously, who is his partner in research, decides that she can't handle life without him, and that this is now the time to test his new technology and try and so they put they shave his head and they put electrodes in his brain and everything like that, and they eventually successfully upload his consciousness into this big supercomputer. That's basically the starting premise of this film, and it gets pretty interesting and pretty silly from there on.
It does. And obviously we can see that the Johnny Depp character is resonating, a Ray Kurzweil type figure. That's who he's supposed to be. He's like we said, he's giving a TED talk, basically, where he's outlining his ideas about artificial intelligence. He's this big AI researcher, and he wants to bring about the singularity. So it's a presentation of that real life concept through fictional character here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he becomes the target of, I guess in one sense, hatred from this Luddite group. And you're saying that they are designated as neo-luddites.
Yep.
That's important.
Yeah.
But a lot of points to go here. But obviously, we're talking about transhumanism. We're talking about technological singularity, artificial intelligence, and they bring in nanotechnology too. All that stuff, the whole shebang.
Yeah, the whole shebang. Yeah, that's right. And it's interesting that just one little side note while I remember is that they named this neo-luddite, well, this neo-luddite group who's opposed to the AI researchers is called RIFT, which is an acronym for Radical Independence from Technology. And I just noticed the word radical. It's and you've also got the fact that it's kind of a rift is almost like a metaphor between for the it's kind of like a symbolic metaphor for the rift in a debate, the rift in between, you're either pro-AI or anti-AI. There's nothing in between. There's a rift in between, It's like, I'm not sure if that was deliberate or whether they, that was sort of put in there arbitrarily or whatever, but I just thought that was very interesting that, the sort of the opposition to the AI developers is called rift, and it sort of just made me think about this kind of whole rift between, you're either for or against, the dialectical idea.
Yeah, the film is obviously presenting that debate, and it also gives you a bit of an answer at the end. We'll hold off to the end of this interview to talk about that. But I knew that the neo-luddite term was a meme for sure when I was watching this movie, because it popped into my head before a character actually said it. A character said it verbatim in the dialogue. He was like, oh yeah, the neo-luddites. I was like, oh yeah, that was already in my head. I'm seeing a meme here. So I mean, when you do the stuff like we're doing here with the reviews, you're looking for these things. Yeah. So they pop up, and they're used. They're used in films like this.
I had the exact same thing. The exact same thing. I mean, when they were presenting this group, I was thinking neo-luddites, and then there was like some newswoman in the background on a television saying neo-luddite group rift, and I was like, oh, there we go. Yeah. So it was the exact same experience as you. Yeah, I was watching for that term, and there it comes. Yeah. It's
It's very predictable, even. So I don't know. I guess to speak about some of the not so great aspects of just the film as away from the messages they're giving in the film, it was a bit predictable, and I think its biggest weakness was that the character development just wasn't there. So it's like, well, who are these characters and what's really going on here? So I don't know what's going on with that, but I know that this has been bashed by critics too. This film a good bit, and at least
really?
That's what I've seen so far. Maybe it's starting to get better reviews, but right away it was not so good.
Well, I don't blame them, because as we were saying before, I mean, it does get pretty ridiculous towards the end. I mean, it becomes like a bad horror fantasy sci-fi show at the end, basically ripping off a whole bunch of other sci-fi ideas in a very contrived way, very, very obvious way, and that was a bit of a disappointment. They could have done a much better job with this film than they did. So it was a bit of a shame there, but there's other ways of looking at that as well. Yeah. So we'll get towards the end of the film, towards the end of the interview, which is not something we usually do here. Usually go the opposite way, but we'll try and do that.
I'm holding myself back, believe me.
I mean, I'm trying to think of things like to say that don't not involve the end of the film. But,
oh man. Well, let's see here. I guess we should mention another character, another one of the main characters. You have the husband and wife, the Castors there, as the main focus. But then you also have this third guy who is another Singularity Summit attendee, another specialist in the field of transhumanism. And he's kind of the sole voice of criticism within the Singularity crowd. He's presenting the ideas as, we got to pursue these, but we also have to look out for all of the negative things that could happen. So
he's like that. What's that guy? Hugo
de Garis, probably.
Hugo de Garis, yeah, exactly. He's like that. He's working within this environment. He's very interested in it, and advancing the technology. But he's also a very vocal critic of the dangers and the pitfalls they're in. Yeah. And he's best friends with the Castors, with Dr. Will Castor and his wife. He's like their best friend, and colleague, but also a critic, and he's written papers sort of kind of questioning their theories and things like that. And so that's not something that I don't know you'd see in the real world. People who generally disagree on things like that tend to oppose each other a bit more often. But anyway, you've got this quite an important third character who plays a fairly pivotal role in the film. His name's Max Waters. That's the character's name in the film. So it's an interesting stuff going on with the names as well. I kind of noticed, at least with the main characters anyway. You definitely picked up on that. So whilst we're on that subject, what did you think of the names?
Well, Will Castor is pretty obvious. It's casting the will. It's a name denoting he's a magician.
Yeah.
So, that's the long and short of it right there. Will Castor is the magician.
The alchemist. Yeah. There's also a bit of etymology in there, which I found, which is kind of interesting. If you look at if you trace the etymology of the name Castor back to in Greek mythology, there was Castor, who was like the product of a union between like a mortal and a god. So, but he was he was actually a mortal born among gods who had the ambition and the aspiration of a god, but was still mortal and who was always seeking, higher aspirations and was seeking to become a god.
And he was one of the two twins of Gemini.
The twins, that's right. Mm-hmm. The was a twin, and his twin brother was immortal, but he was mortal. Mm-hmm. So there was kind of a conflict there. And there's lots of different versions of that particular myth, but that was the general kind of theme there. With that, he was a mortal but born among gods. Yeah,
it's the whole juxtaposition of heaven and earth and bouncing back and forth from the two.
Yeah. And then of course you've got, like Will or William. That's maybe not so significant, but Will has always, signified like desire and tenacity, and also through Anglo-Saxon history has become to be known as like the name of a protector or a guardian. There's been a lot of kings and oligarchs named William, or Will. So there's a little bit of significance there, I guess. But I think your interpretation of the person who casts the will, I think, is probably more apt in this situation.
Yeah, definitely.
But any other names that you picked up on?
That was the big one, really. The name of some of the towns I noticed, they go to a desert town to set up shop to build their technological stronghold, and the desert town is called Brightwood, and that kind of popped out to me. Bright, obviously being bright like the sun or light and all that, fire, and then wood being a tree, being a product of the earth. I guess you could kind of call it like a bright wood would be like a burning log or ash flying through the air. That's embers, things like that. So embers of burning wood, which is burning the earth, and it's very symbolic in that when you this passing to a higher degree of consciousness is symbolized lots of times by this trial by fire and of burning, and of when something burns, it raises up into the air, right? Like the ashes, like they burn and they go up into the air. That's symbolic of rising up to a higher level and all that stuff. I noticed that with the desert town. That's definitely very interesting, and there's a couple of sort of directions you can go in with that interpretation. But again, we're at the end of the film, so stay away from there for now. But you've also got the Will Castor's wife named Evelyn, and there's a number of different ways you can interpret that name. Initially I just thought Evelyn, as in terms of like Eve, first woman, or godly woman, the woman who sought knowledge, who sought light, who broke the rules to gain,
enlightenment, so to speak, and it was punished for it. But if you look into the etymology of that particular name, it generally seems to revolve around like things like radiance and beauty and light. Or life. In Hebrew, it means life, I think. And in Celtic mythology or Celtic history, at least, it means life or life-giving. So, there's a little bit of symbolism that ties into the whole theme of the film there with her name as well. Mm-hmm. And perhaps not as much as Will Castor, but, I think there's something there, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I guess with the Castor thing, too, being the Gemini deal, maybe the two Gemini twins could almost be symbolized in the man and the woman here, the Johnny Depp and his wife, because the male and the female, the two sides. Well, maybe there's a little bit of that going on.
Yeah, because I can't remember how the particular story in that particular Greek myth goes, but there was some kind of problem or some kind of conflict between the twins, and the twin, I can't remember how you pronounce the name, the twin of Castor was Pollux. That's right, Pollux. Yeah, I can't remember what the conflict was, but basically he became so guilty that he asked to become mortal rather than immortal, in order to sort of feel less guilty about the actions that he had, partaken in. So again, I don't know the full details of this particular myth, but it's interesting that we have a sort of a similar type of theme happening towards the end of the film again. Yeah. So we can get into that later on. But
sure. Yeah, I guess Pollux or one of them chooses death over eternal life, basically. That is significant, huh?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, there's lots of sun symbolism, light symbolism going on all throughout this, and you'll notice that they use a sunflower in the opening scene, and they bring it back for the closing scene. A sunflower, water dripping off of it, highly symbolic there. That's growing in their garden. So this is definitely a film that's that's pretty replete with symbolism. I mean, it gets that part right at least. They do fit that in. However, as we were saying, the film isn't that good, and it gets a little wacky towards the middle.
Yeah. It's sort of it goes from what could have been a very interesting and thought-provoking film relating to AI, like the previous film we reviewed called Her. If people check that out, it could have gone perhaps more in that direction, which is very, very interesting, thought-provoking, and well done. And ends up turning into almost like a B grade, straight to television, like ridiculous sci-fi channel, nonsense towards the end. So it's a bit of a shame, but again, there's multiple ways you can look at that in terms of what ideas they were trying to get out, and what sort of predictive programming elements were present in doing that. So
there's one important point we should just bring up right now, is that Johnny Depp's character is offered some money and cooperation from the Department of Defense and this guy from the FBI in the film, and he immediately turns it down. He's like, no, we've never taken money from the government. We're not going to. I'm not going to start here. So that was a very important point that popped up to both of us.
Very, very I'm not getting involved with the establishment. I'm not getting involved with the government or the military. I'm a lone researcher. I'm sticking to my own code of conduct. I've got integrity, and I'm not just going to take a big fat paycheck from these big evil corporations and military companies and all the rest of it. So it's kind of presenting him, the idea of him being a sort of a lone, maverick, in the field of AI and converging technology research. Which is pretty inaccurate, really, in terms of most people.
Yeah, because we're given the idea that that's what these people in real life are, and we're consistently given that concept actually in real life, very subtly, but we are. We're expected to think that singularity and transhumanism will be the product of these independent researchers, and that's completely separate from any sort of government money or military defense budgets, anything like that.
Or any particular or any coordinated agenda of any sort.
It's just independent scientists working on these high technologies, and I mean, nothing could be further from the truth, really. But I definitely see this as a very important meme that's being brought up here again in this movie, but I've seen it before, and I'm sure we'll see it again, because we're expected to believe that nonsense, that the Singularity project is, just these honest little independent researchers, like the alchemists of old, like these single guys working in their laboratory to work on their experiments. That's just not how it works. It works through large collaborative efforts between government, military, corporations, and academia too. So I mean, it goes across the board in real life.
Yeah. I mean, it is a project, as you've described yourself many times in your books and articles and podcasts. This is the Transhuman project is a project. It's a coordinated project across many different sectors. Whereas in this film, of course, and as you said, and in real life, we're constantly being presented with the idea that these are just kind of lone, independent, maverick scientists who are just kind of all working separately, towards the same goal, just by chance, and it's because they're helping each other out with a bit of research now and again, and doing the odd project here and there for the government or some university or whatever. But independent, they're independent people. They're sort of fairly normal people. The integrity of their ideas and their philosophies are paramount, rather than any kind of ties to the establishment in terms of funding and help with resources and any kind of coordinated agendas of any sort.
Yeah, and with this film, once Johnny Depp is put into the machine, he's uploaded. He becomes a computer consciousness, basically. They set up shop in the desert town of Brightwood, they were mentioned before, and he kind of, as he's building up his technological infrastructure, he sort of goes about a humanitarian mission of sorts by finding these infirm and sick people. He brings them in and he heals them in a Jesus-type fashion. And
it's very biblical.
Yeah. So he goes about that as his mission. That's interesting.
It's funny the way that the whole thing happened, because when the Johnny Depp character, Castor's consciousness has successfully uploaded it into this the supercomputer he's been developing. He immediately has access to everything. He's like omnipotent. He's got he is every computer in the world. He's every server in the world. He's got access to everything. So he immediately goes about shifting money around and investing in big stocks and making huge amounts of money. And so they through all this financial work that he's doing, within the space of like an hour or something, he manages to raise like millions and millions in capital and set up this big, I guess you may an R&D type facility in this small town called Brightwood, 5 stories underground, and they hire this company, to do the work for them, and the locals are kind of wondering what's going on, and what happens is that some young kids just to give a bit of a backstory, what happens is one of the lead contractor who's doing the work for them, who's like setting up all these solar panels and building all the buildings downstairs and everything. He gets actually attacked and beaten up, and he gets beaten to within an inch of his life by some thugs, and so he's rushed to the center, the Brightwood Center underground, and Johnny Depp, basically heals him with this like nanotechnology stuff that he's created, and it's very similar to the film Elysium, where you see him sort of lie down on this in this kind of biopod thing, and these machines set to work, and all of a sudden, like all of his wounds are regenerated within the space of about 10 seconds, and subsequently he develops like almost superhuman intelligence, at least superhuman powers. And what happens is a local boy basically gets like a cell phone footage of him lifting all these heavy bits of machinery around, and then this video goes viral. And because the video goes viral, all these people flock to the town. The old, the infirm, the ill, the diseased, and they come to be healed. Very much in a biblical Jesus type fashion. And not only are they healed by the nanotechnology and all the different converging technologies that Castor has developed, but they're actually assimilated into a type of collective. And they essentially become like drone workers who continue work on this facility. And there's kind of a little piece of dialogue in the film. I can't remember whether it's from Castor himself or by somebody else, where he talks about the fact that they've been assimilated into like a hive mind collective, but they're still autonomous.
That's right.
They can still make decisions. They're still individuals. Like they're in a hive mind, but they're still individuals. It's like they haven't lost out on anything. So there's that whole promo idea put in there. Like like the hive mind is something you can kind of step out of and step back into, and it's no big deal. It's kind of like just a little sort of like a little world you can just dip your toes in whenever you feel like it. To sort of get a bit more to get access to knowledge and to work on group projects as part of a collective. Very much like the Borg. And so that was very, very interesting, and has some religious or at least biblical themes running through it.
They're definitely bringing up the hive mind concept purposely, as they are with almost every other transhuman idea you've ever heard. And it's funny because the film is obviously trying to make the Johnny Depp compound and the hive mind collective appear creepy. So it's purposely making them look creepy and playing on your fear, because they know you as the audience are worried by these ideas, and you're going to see them as creepy naturally. So they just play on that angle. They're like, oh, okay, well, you're scared of this? Like, well, here we go. We're going to use everything that scares you, and they do that with effect and with purpose, I think. And I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. There's a lot of a lot of psychological trickery in this film in terms of how the sort of the moral spin that is put on certain ideas, and almost a bit of reverse psychology going on there as well. They're sort of playing to fears, and then they're kind of placating other fears and concerns, and then there's a bit of guilt tripping going on as well. But again, this all sort of culminates towards the end of the film, and the conclusion of the film. So,
I'm not sure how much longer I can hold on. I'm not saying the ending here.
Dive right in here. So we'll just leap into it.
Here we go.
So basically, we've got a situation where Johnny Depp is omnipotent. He's transcended. He's basically a consciousness. Living in basically the entire digital grid of the world, with access to all of the information, and he previously talked about the fact that to transcend would basically constitute him having more knowledge than the entire history of all human beings put together, So, with this knowledge, he's just developing technology at an astonishing rate, and things are just getting crazier and crazier. And as you said, there's kind of a creepy feel, out in this town of Brightwood, where they're setting up this big facility, and they've got more and more people coming in to be assimilated into the collective. And meanwhile, this the friend of the Castors, this guy Max Waters, who was as we said before, a close friend but also a critic. He's sort of like he gets captured by this group called Rift, the radical independence from technology group, because they know that he's one of the few people who knows enough about this particular type of technology to somehow bring it down in some way, So he becomes a hostage, and then the sort of the plot and the sequence of events within Brightwood unfolds to the degree where the FBI and the government and the group Rift all end up basically teaming up together, to try and basically shut down this installation, because it's becoming quite scary. There the technology is being developed and becoming more advanced at an astonishing rate, and the power of the Johnny Depp character, this omnipotent sort of digital god, is just growing by the day, And so they come up with the idea that, well, we've got to take this installation out, and so they get a whole bunch of old sort of like rail guns and things like that, and like basically analog weapons, things that can't be shut down by digital means, like cannons basically, and start sort of like a civil war. Well, not a civil war, but you know what I mean, like a little sort of mini kind of standoff where you've got this sort of group of scientists and federal agents and stuff like that, basically just lobbing cannonballs at this installation, trying to shut it down. It basically descends into stupidness and silliness from there on.
Yeah. But the other scientist who was a critic of Singularity, he's kind of wooed by the Rift group. He's captured by them at first, and they're violent towards him, and he's afraid of them at first, but slowly he's brought over to their side of the coin, and in doing so, the audience is sort of made to do the same. They're like, oh, okay, yeah, these neo-luddite group, they're expressing some of the feelings that I have about these ideas as they're being brought up to me. I'm intimidated by all this, so it makes sense that he, being prudent, would not want to go ahead with this. And then earlier in the film, he was also saying, when Johnny Depp gets uploaded in the computer, he's like, well, it's not really him. Like, how do we know it's him? It's based off of him, but it's its own thing. And that whole premise is kind of the whole film goes from there. It's this supercomputer mind which is posing as Johnny Depp and his character. Is it really him, or is it just this AI machine that's just seeking power for itself and it wants total control? So as we're saying, the audience is made to believe that is the case. That's this evil AI that's just trying to assimilate everything. It's taking over, and that's played up time and time again, and to the point where the audience will actually side with characters that are and were portrayed as kind of evil characters. The Rift group is obviously portrayed as bad. Yeah, the terrorists, and even the government is portrayed as bad in a couple points there too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they do make that point, but then they make you side with them as well. So that's interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of sort of shifting allegiances throughout the film. You've got, as we said, we've got the Max Waters character who was initially, like a friend, and although he was skeptical, he was a friend and supporter of the casters. But once the Brightwood facility is complete and up and running, and once it really starts to take off and starts this sort of assimilation, program, he ends up sort of siding with the Rift, group and helping the federal government sort of try and disable it. And you've also got the fact that Johnny Depp's wife, she's still alive, in normal human form, and she's sort of trying to maintain or at least retain the relationship that they had prior to him dying. So he's basically just he's a digital consciousness. You see his face on a computer screen, but that's it. So there's no physicality there. But that this relationship still sort of continues in the same way that we described in the film Her, which we reviewed last month. We've got a relationship where one of the parties is physical and one of them is an artificial intelligence, is non-physical, and so there's a whole bunch of sort of quandaries and confusion on the part of this this Evelyn Castor character. But again, it's not done particularly well. The character development is fairly contrived, and I think it could have been done a lot better. But we reached this point where things are getting pretty crazy down at Brightwood, and the sort of this group of sort of, well, it's kind of like a ad hoc, basically, assortment of people from this Rift and people, Max Waters, and people from the government, and basically trying to take this installation out, and they try and destroy it. But then Johnny Depp releases all these nanoprobe nanite type things, which are capable of not only repairing and reconstructing organic material, but also inorganic material. They're basically they're like a swarm of locusts almost. They just they basically swarm around something and rebuild it into its previous form. whilst sort of upgrading it at the same time into something better and something stronger, so it's literally like a form of it's almost the exact type of form of assimilation that you see in the Borg in Star Trek, the probes serve the same purpose. So
they were playing on that concept because it's an established nemesis used in fiction. So again, they're using that tool. They're like, okay, we know you're familiar with this and we know you're scared of it, so we're going to use it as the perceived antagonist. But here we go with the ending. I got to do it now. What they do is they pull a reversal in the end. And how is that done? Well, in tragic fashion, Johnny Depp and his wife die, and the reason is that the wife eventually sides with the government and the rest of that group in believing that, okay, this facility's getting out of control. Johnny Depp isn't really Johnny Depp. That's not my husband. We got to take this thing out. So they they put a computer virus in her body that she is going to go over there because Johnny Depp and the whole facility trusts her. So she's going to go over there and infect the system with this virus because she's the only one that'll be able to do it. So that ends up happening, but as that's happening, it's revealed that basically that's the point where you're starting to see, oh, wait a minute, the government actually is evil, and this terrorist group is shallow and short-sighted, and they're no good either. And oh, this machine that we thought was just an AI taking control, oh, it actually was Dr. Castor all along. It really was him, and it's revealed that that's the case. The two die in tragic fashion, and then it's revealed basically that, oh, look, we were siding with the wrong side. We should have been with this whole hive mind nanotech enhanced AI system all along.
Because what did they actually do wrong? I mean, apart from some of the shall we say, value orientated or moral, things to do with like morality and values and ethics and philosophy. So some of the concepts are sort of ambiguous, but in terms of what he's actually done, this Johnny Depp character in establishing this huge complex and assimilating these people. I mean, he hasn't really. I mean, he's healed people. He's literally made them strong and productive and healthy again, and they seem to be fairly happy in their new roles as kind of these sort of semi-automatons, and is he doing? It's like throughout the film, although these themes that keep coming up again and again that are designed to scare us, through the established memes such as the whole assimilation concept. I mean, what has he actually done wrong? He's really only helped people, and he's really only done things to, at least on the surface, improve things, He hasn't actually destroyed anything. He hasn't actually killed anyone. And they make a point of saying that in the film on a number of occasions. He hasn't actually killed anyone, And you also have this debate as to, is it Johnny Depp? Is it Will Castor, or is it just a computer simulacra of Will Castor? Is it just an artificial intelligence with his voice and with some of his memories? And this debate is, it comes up a number of times throughout the film, but the point being is, although they present all these scary themes and all this, this rapidly converging and advancing technology, it doesn't actually do any real particular sort of harm to anyone. It's scary, and it's philosophically, morally ambiguous, but it's not sort of it's not evil. It's not vindictive. And as you said, towards the end of the film, we sort of do learn that it really was Johnny Depp. It really was his mind. Obviously he had changed somewhat in transforming from a human being into an artificial intelligence. I think there was definitely a lust for power of some degree that didn't exist before, came about through his transcendence, so to speak. But on the whole, I think he still genuinely did love his wife. He still genuinely did want to help people. And so we're made to feel guilty for feeling scared about all these ideas and this rapidly converging and advancing technology throughout the film. Yeah. And so as you say at the end, the audience is made to feel guilty, like, oh, look, we've spent the entire film sort of being afraid of and hating and being sort of confused by all these ideas, but at the end of the film we've almost got this kind of this tragic Romeo and Juliet scenario where the two lovers kind of end up being dead next to each other on the bed. She's just basically asked him to transcend her, to upload her consciousness into the machine, the pin machine that he's developed, so they can be together as artificial consciousnesses. But of course, as you said before, this was actually a ruse that was designed to destroy him. Whilst she was being transcended, she injected a virus that was developed by Max Waters into the system, and the whole thing just crumbled into pieces.
The whole reason that the two lovers tragically die is because of the ignorance of the outside world. They couldn't see the true beauty of what they were doing. So that's what's presented here. Yeah. And I mean, to me, this is the whole point of the film. And I also kind of think that maybe, we were saying how the film isn't so good, I just kind of think that maybe they were trying to concentrate so hard on making that work, that whole twist at the end work, that other parts of the film went by the wayside, and they put so much effort into ensuring that would work that maybe some other things suffered. I don't know, but certainly, I mean, this really is the whole point to me, is making the audience feel guilty. Like, oh, I felt scared of all these, singularity concepts. That was wrong of me to just judge them like that. And then it's a way of, getting people to hold back criticism of these things when they encounter them in the real life, because they'll go and they'll initially say, oh, this is scary, but then subconsciously they'll remember, oh, wait, I was scared before and I was wrong. So that will happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And then they make a big point throughout the film to present the Will Castor character as being very sort of down to earth and in touch with nature. I mean, he's he's an AI researcher, one of the most predominant in the field apparently, and yet he lives in this kind of rundown bungalow cottage thing in the middle of the woods that's kind of like overgrown by trees, and it's like very, very deliberately presented to you as being like this guy's in touch with nature. He's not just a tech head. He's kind of, there's almost like a spiritual twist to it. It kind of reminds me of of Aubrey de Grey, the one of the most sort of noted or famous transhumanists out there. He's got this kind of like long beard, and he spends a lot of time out in nature and philosophizing about nature and the world and all the rest of it. And I think that whole theme was held on again and again throughout the film, constantly identifying. And you also see it in the scenery as well. You see a lot of scenery where, like when Johnny Depp actually does die initially at the beginning of the film, his ashes are sort of sprinkled into a beautiful mountain lake, and there's lots of these scenes of nature and all this other kind of stuff. And so I think they're deliberately again and again trying to get you to identify with the fact that this guy is very, very connected with nature, and is not just some sort of like a tech hippie or something, not just some sort of some cold scientist working in some sort of super advanced lab who's completely disconnected from the natural world and has no care or interest in it. So I think it was deliberately done.
And the couple have the garden in the backyard, and that's where the sunflower grows, and the sunflower is like the one plant that survives, and
that's right,
the one plant that you really notice after the whole apocalyptic thing happens at the end, because when Will Castor is killed and his system goes down, the entire internet is taken down because he was connected to it.
Because he was the internet.
Yeah. So there's another idea. It's if you're against this, the entire internet will come down. Things like this. The world ends if this situation comes.
Exactly. But it's interesting because that's how the film starts. The opening scene of the film and the ending scene of the film are the same scene. So the opening scene of the film is the friend of the Castors, this Max Waters walking into their old house, this old rundown sort of cottage in the middle of nowhere in the bush. Everything's overgrown. He walks out into the back garden, and he's talking about the fact that this is set 5 years into the future after the events of Transcendence, and he's basically talking about how the fact that there's no internet anymore and there's no phones anymore, and we're sort of back to the Stone Age now, and he's just kind of philosophize. Well, he's kind of just reflecting on these events, and so he goes to visit the old the residence of the Castors, and he walks into the back garden and sees that the only two plants that have been left alive are these two sunflowers.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, at the beginning of the film, he walks into this back garden and starts telling the story. And right at the end of the film, they sort of go back to the beginning with him standing in the back garden of the Castor's house with these two sunflowers, and you see a drop of water. And this is brought up again and again in the film, constantly showing you drops of water. And you've got the name Max Waters, of course, and all these water drops, and we could go down that road, but anyway, it's quite interesting because you see at the very end of the film, you see these two drops of water drop off a sunflower, and they land in like a leaf or something like that, and you can see that there's some kind of chemical reaction immediately starts once these two drops of water hit this leaf. It's like a dying leaf that starts to become regenerated. So it's kind of like hinting at the fact that although the whole grid has been shut down, Johnny Depp's been killed off, he no longer exists, perhaps him and his wife are still, alive in some form of, purely digital consciousness, within this nanotechnology. That's the very, very final scene of the film before the credits roll. Is these two drops of water falling into sort of like another a little pond of water inside a leaf and starting to regenerate that leaf. Indicating that they're not dead yet. There's a second chance that maybe
the sequel.
The sequel.
Johnny Depp too.
Johnny Depp too. Yeah,
it's back.
It's almost like it was almost like Terminator-ish. He's back. Skynet. They can't shut it down. Every time they think it's dead, it's back. And that was the final scene of the film. But
that character. I mean, the Max character is very important because we were made to side with him too, and his suspicions more than him. We're siding with his suspicions of the technology, and he was the expert, so he ought to know anyway. And he becomes a tragic character too, in that he let his suspicions get the best of him, and because of it, an apocalypse comes. So it's him paying penance for that, going back to the garden and sort of saying he's sorry and that sort of thing, and then you see the nano reflection or whatever. So I just so many devices to incite that guilt trip. I mean, I really do feel that that's the main point that was trying to be made here in the film, the main point for making the film. And I think through the silliness of the latter half of the film, where the technology is just advancing at such an astonishing rate, it's just crazy and unbelievable, and all the crazy things that happen because of this technology and what it affords. I think in many ways, that's almost a distraction, from the concepts that you're outlining there. I think through this silliness and through all these kind of explosions and conflicts and through all this Hollywoodism, it's kind of distracting you
you away from the fact that you're kind of being guilt tripped, you know?
Yeah.
So I think if it was a more intelligently done film, I think people might have, perhaps a larger portion of the audience might have clicked on to the fact that there was a kind of a dialectic being played out here. Yeah. But I think you're distracted away from that through the kind of just this stupid Hollywood Borg ending, you know?
Yeah. I also think that the whole guilt trip thing is kind of brought about so quick, that the twist happens so fast, that the audience gets upset at the end and possibly alienated. It would be good to get... You don't know until you talk to other people. It'd be good to hear from other people what they thought at the end, but I just felt like it wasn't done so well, and that the audience just ended up being angry, if anything.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, whenever I'm in the cinema after a film, especially if it's a film which I think is significant in terms of themes and memes, you know, I'll always like keep an ear open for what people are talking about after the film. I listen to the chatter, you know, because, you know, whenever like a group of people go and view a film, once the credits roll, people start saying, "Oh, that was really good," or "I like this part," or "I like that bit," or you know, they reflect on the film, you know, amongst one another. And when I went and saw this at the cinema, and when the credits rolled up, I was kind of listening out for what people were saying. You know, I'm very interested to see what their reactions were, and what the first thing that came to people's minds were at the end of this film. And I can't remember exactly what people were saying, but I remember walking out of the theater feeling that people, the audience was more confused than anything else.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
I felt that people were like, what?
Yeah,
you know, like what just happened there?
Yeah, I don't get it.
I don't get it. Like,
how am I supposed to feel?
Yeah, how am I supposed to feel? Yeah, exactly. That was the kind of impression I got. Like, is AI good or is it bad? I'm not quite sure. What are they saying here?
Yeah.
You know, and
because if you're not viewing this as, like, you know, a play to your consciousness, and that, you know, the filmmakers were like playing around with those things, then you're just gonna be caught up in it, and it will be confusing, because of the way it was done was a bit confusing. It was done very quickly, and possibly too quickly, and that's why the audience was confused. And I think that, I don't know, it might have worked. I think they understood that the guilt was there, and ultimately, and I think the idea was planted, and that was the point of the film, I think. But at that, let's draw this episode of Themes and Memes to a close here, Adam. What do you say?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've covered most of the important, you know, themes and memes in this film. I mean, we obviously, you know, like any film, we could go on forever and ever about this particular theme or that particular theme. But I think, you know, your analysis in saying that this was basically a guilt trip, you know, in favor of the transhumanist movement or singularity advocates in general, is quite apt, and is quite on point, because I think that's generally what has been done here. You know, basically we've been sort of goaded into identifying with one side of the argument for most of the film, and there's been a lot of debate and a lot of switching allegiances and a lot of confusion throughout the film. But then quite quickly towards the end of the film, we realize, or at least we're sort of prompted to kind of consider the fact that we may have been wrong, we may have backed the wrong side, and that our primitive preconceptions and our primitive human fears, you know, about technology, you know, may have led us to, you know, prejudge this kind of almost godly character of Will Castor, you know. Definitely a singularity sales pitch done in a very different way than we used to, but a singularity sales pitch nonetheless.
Absolutely. There will be more coming on future episodes of Themes and Memes, I'm sure. Yeah. And with that, we'll just plug the podcast itself. I hope you're all listening. I mean, we do the YouTube thing. I post this to the Transresistor radio feed at my website, ageoftransitions.com, so you can subscribe to that and listen to every episode of Themes and Memes that way. We do one episode a month, and your website is Cerebral Revolt. Adam, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No. Still working on the website. It's not, still looking pretty basic at the moment, but it is slowly under construction. So again, just keep an eye on that. And in the meantime, all the stuff can be found on your website, theageoftransitions.com or ageoftransitions.com. I believe they're both redirect to the same site.
Yep.
We've got there's plenty more films and plenty more ideas that we've got in the works. So I just encourage listeners to stay tuned, because we've, as you know, Aaron, we've been talking about a lot of other different stuff recently, and we've not just for themes and memes, but for other discussions as well, and a whole bunch of other topics. So there's a lot coming. Stay tuned. It's going to be an interesting next few months for sure.
Yes, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care.